A few years ago at my parish, there was one of my parishioners was having a barbecue for his family, and started up his little propane barbecue pit, and walked inside and closed the sliding glass door. And right when he closed the sliding glass door, the propane tank exploded. And what happened was the side of his house caught on fire, and within 3 minutes, his attic caught on fire, and the entire roof of his house was engulfed in flames in under 5 minutes. So the house was on fire. His kids were playing upstairs. His wife was in the kitchen. He was, shocked by this explosion that just happened. They're trying to figure out what was going on. And thanks be to God, they got all their kids out. There were some neighbor kids that were over as well. But they lost everything. Their entire house burnt to the ground in under half an hour. And I remember I was walking up the driveway to go talk to them, and they're still really shaken, and the fire was out at that point. But they said something that lots of us hear most of the time when we're watching the television and we see something like earthquakes or fires or whatnot. And they just said, "I'm so thankful that all of us are okay." The rest of it is just stuff. It was lots of nice stuff, lots of stuff that we really loved and held dear to us, but we're all okay. And since we have our family and our relationship, that's what's most important. And I would like to think, if we reflect on that, I've asked young people before, I said, if your house was on fire, what would you run back into the house for? Now, I would hope that before you would say, my iPod, that, my brother might come, to your mind first. Right? I don't know. My iPod's pretty cool. My brother's kind of annoying. But there's something it's just instinct inside of us. It just says that no, our relationships with other people, they're the most important things. And why are they the most important thing? Because our relationships define who we are. That's how we kind of know and describe ourselves to others. It's about the relationships that we have. I'm the youngest of 5. I grew up, like a normal Catholic kid. But I look just like my dad. And I laugh just like my dad. In fact, so much so that sometimes when I laugh, people think that it's my dad that's in the room. My mom, she was a dog person growing up. She used to breed and show collies. And so we're dog people, right? We hate cats. We love dogs, that's right. And so, if you say you don't like dogs, it's like telling me you don't like Jesus. We're just, it's in my blood. But there's also little weird things about our families that kind of define who we are that we don't know growing up. I was sharing with Bishop Rice just before Mass. I said, growing up, we didn't let teeth fall out. My parents would pull them. So if you were in our house and your tooth started to wiggle, that tooth was going to be out of your skull in 48 hours or less. And my mom, it wasn't we can't wait for the tooth fairy to come. My mom literally told us, if we don't get that out, it could fall out while you're asleep and you'll choke on it and die. So I'm like, oh my gosh, this little boy, eyes wide open at night being come on, tooth, get out of my skull, blah, blah. And my brother, my oldest brother, he's 10 years older than me. When he got married, and he had kids, and his first daughter was in 2nd grade, and her teeth are starting to wiggle. And he's like, well, time to go in the kitchen and pull that bad boy out. My sister-in-law is like, that's child abuse. You can't do that. But that's who, part of who we are. We're just defined. We don't even know sometimes how we're being molded and formed by the relationships that we have. Growing up with our friends, we always try to be like our friends, and for me, growing up, that meant that you had to have the right type of lunchbox, going to grade school, you had to have Knight Rider or Dukes of Hazzard or, He-Man, with the thermos and the cap and everything else, or Trapper Keepers came out, and we didn't have enough money for the real Trapper Keepers, so we made our own Trapper Keepers. You don't even know what Trapper Keepers are, but they were awesome, and we all wanted to have them. I had a side spike, for 4 years of my life, I had a side spike because that was the cool haircut. Then when I got into middle school, it became the skater cut. And if you don't know what that is, it's when you grow your hair out long and you shave the side of your head, and it's really an awful haircut. But you wanted to have that because that's what your friends did, and you defined yourself by the way that they looked. I'm from St. Louis, And if you're from St. Louis, you know that frozen custard and toasted ravioli are a food group. We know that it's Missouri, not Missouri. It's farty, not 40. Sometimes we say, the lard be with you, not the Lord be with you, but the lard be with you, It's like we're going to Krispy Kremes, like delicious glazed Jesus, But you see, what we're celebrating this weekend and the whole purpose of what we're about, especially as Catholics and Christians, is that Jesus comes and he wants to have an encounter with us. That Jesus comes so that God no longer remains just like an idea, but he wants to have a personal relationship with you. And he tells us in today's gospel that what he wants is that he wants you to define yourself by that relationship more than any other. And that's difficult for us. Our Holy Father in his new encyclical, he talks about this. He says, God doesn't want us just to have, again, this encounter with like an unknown word. He wants us to have a relationship with the everlasting thou, who calls us personally by name. That we look at all the patriarchs in the Old Testament that we heard about today, Joseph, but Abraham, Isaac. He said, and what they knew is that they weren't the result of some sort of just like cosmic nothingness and chance, but that they were called and destined from all eternity to have meaning and purpose and a relationship with a God who then gave them a mission in the world. Holy Father continues and he says, the great cathedrals of the world that have all the stained glass windows of the saints, they shine down on us as a people gathered together in worship to remind us that now is our time, that they allow the light of God to shine through them. But if we don't have that relationship, if we just know about Jesus, but we don't know Jesus, if we just kind of relegate him as some sort of like powerful historical figure, which is a big temptation for us. Sometimes you even see in society, they talk about who are the most influential people of history. And you have these kind of silly lists. They're like, well, Isaac Newton, Albert Einstein, the Beatles, this guy named Jesus. And I think about, how, well, what was your contribution to the world? Well, I kind of came up with this whole concept that there's this gravitational force that holds all of us together. And it happened one time when I was sitting, something fell on my head, and I thought, what made that fall? And Einstein sits around and he thinks, well, I thought, how do we determine, what time is? And I thought, well, maybe there's, light going through the universe and at the speed of light, and it's this theory of relativity and everything else. And I think that, they turn to Jesus and say, what'd you do? He's like, I created light. I created the world. I conquered the world. I redeemed the world. That Jesus isn't just another significant historical figure. He is the author of history. That everything is geared towards and flows from him. And the amazing thing is that he tells us that not only is he the almighty, the majestic, the powerful, but that he loves us so much that every single hair on your head is counted. That he knows the desires of your heart before you know them yourselves. And his greatest desire of his heart is to be in a relationship with you. To love you and to encourage you and to inspire you and to allow his light to shine through you to transform the world. That his heart burns with that desire. Not that you just know about him, but that you know him. And we have to really ask ourselves, do I know him? Do you believe that Jesus is alive? It's not just that he walked around 2,000 years ago and said some really good stuff, but that he's speaking to you today. That just as he called his disciples to come and be with him, he calls you. And what does he tell his disciples? He tells them It is enough for a disciple to become like his master. That he doesn't just pass through and say, well, just kind of, listen to this, kind of follow these rules and have a good life. He says, I want to have such a close relationship with you that when people see you, they see me. When they hear you, they hear me. If we don't have that relationship, our Holy Father tells us this in his new encyclical. He says, then we're given into idolatry. That we'll find some other way to try to define ourselves. And we can think about that and we think, well, it's not like I have some pagan statue in my house that I'm bowing down before and offering sacrifice to. But ask yourself this question. What do you make sacrifices for? Popularity? Sports? To be acknowledged by your boyfriend or girlfriend? You see, the devil's very clever because he takes things that in and of themselves aren't bad or could be even good, but if we make them an idol, if we put them above Jesus Christ and we make them the source of our happiness or the source of our identity, then everything is going to be out of whack in our lives. We're going to be walking around unfulfilled because we have this heart that only God can satisfy. This longing for meaning and purpose in our life that only the author of life can give to us. But what's frightening about our relationship with Jesus Christ is this, is that when we have a relationship with him, we know it's going to change us. And you can have an idol and be the same. But if you have a Lord, it's going to change your life forever. You think about the past 2,000 years of church history, and you think about all the ups and downs, the persecutions of the church. You think about all these different, empires that have risen and have fallen, and all about the great saints. And we look at them, and again, we kind of have this prayer card image of the saints, where they just look perfect. That we imagine that they had it all together all the time. That they were just kind of these abnormal freaks of nature that God kind of created and opened up in a special way. And we're just like, well, that was that saint, but that's not me. But you see, each one of those saints didn't have everything all together. They didn't know how it was going to work out. What they did know is that they had a God who loved them. And what made them so radically different from everybody else is that they chose to define themselves by that relationship and nothing else. And when we're drawn into the person of Christ, if we become like him, then we have a faith like him and we have a life like him. And you think about how Jesus walked around the world, and it's weird to think of Jesus as a person of faith, but you think about the faith that Jesus had in God the Father. That when his humanity was stricken with fear and worry and concern, that he placed his trust in the Father. And that when he draws us into a relationship with him, he calls us to have that same trust. So he tells us, I know that you have a lot of fear in your life. I can see it. You're afraid of what other people think of you. You're afraid of being a failure. You're afraid of being made fun of. He says, have no fear. Don't even fear those that could kill you, because I have come to conquer death itself. That's freedom. That's a real relationship. And so as we continue our journey through this weekend, that's the invitation that I think that God has for each one of us. And that is the desire that all of us priests have. That's the desire of the team and all the speakers. It's not that you walk out of here saying, well, that was a really cool talk, or, that was a really cool song, or, that was, just this funky beard competition that we had, and I can remember that. Our desire is to lead you to the person of Jesus Christ, because he's transformed my life. Because I can't imagine trying to define myself in any other way, because this has given me fullness of life and joy and happiness and set me free from bad haircuts and lunch boxes and wicked tooth fairies, you know? It's real and true. And it's time for us to stop just saying that we believe it and to start living it. I don't know, and you don't know how your life is going to turn out. And we can turn on the television and we look around and we see that there's lots of problems in our society. Even problems in our church and with us as a people of faith, and we can say, I have no idea what the solution is, and I can honestly stand up here and tell you that I don't know practically what it's going to look like. But I do know that in His infinite wisdom and in His divine providence, God has placed you and I here at this moment. That His desire is to let His light shine through us, that you're called to be the light in the darkness, at home, with your friends, at your school, and at your parishes. That you're called to be an ambassador of truth, to speak up when you see something that you know is wrong. When we have those little butterflies in our stomach that says, I should say or do something. That we're called to overcome that fear of what other people might say or think and to do what we know is right. You are called a Christian, another Christ, another anointed one, another one who was chosen before all time to change this world and to draw people back to heaven, to God the Father. I'll end with this. St. Augustine, as you all know, a great story about a man who was seeking happiness in his life, was, seeking it in all the wrong places, was a smart guy, so he's walking around trying to, find the best schools of philosophy, listening to the smartest people of his day, going from town to town. And eventually he bumps into this bishop named Ambrose, who kind of convicts him about the truth of the gospel. And he realizes that truth isn't an idea, but it's a person. And he goes from being this kind of wayward wanderer who was seeking happiness in all the wrong places, in a lot of similar ways that we seek it, seeking the idols of his society at his time. And he winds up becoming a bishop and a doctor of the church. And he said this, and maybe this is a prayer for all of us as we continue this liturgy. He said, you do not have to seek far and wide for the offering you are to make to God. You do not need to examine the herds or set sail to some distant shore to find an incense of offering. The offering that is most pleasing to God is within you. It is your heart. And your heart must be crushed. And if you are afraid that your heart will perish so, says St. Augustine, you have the response. Create a clean heart in me, O God, and put a steadfast spirit within me. For a new heart to be created, the old one must be crushed. Whatever fear you have, whatever reservations, whatever doubts, whatever might be holding us back to being receptive to the invitation that God gives us to be the defining relationship in our lives, let us place them on this altar as an offering to God, and not just be a people that say we believe, but be a people who actually go out into the world and live what we profess.